today we're going to go over the BRRRR method. It's my favorite method to owning real estate. It's what I've used for pretty much all of my rental properties. And it's just an acronym. It stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance. I think Chris, one of the first investor seminars I had March of 2020, which was, we all probably had COVID at that time, didn't know it. There was like 40 people in a room, and yeah, it was a week before they shut down, but up to that point, they were holding that we were good, right? Uh, um, I I spoke about the BRRRR method, and you've been doing it ever since. It's excellent. So we're going to get into it a bit today. Okay, so today is about buying and holding. It's the focus of this. So for those of you who've been here before, grid is just for investors. It's basically, I own Grid DELCO, and there's 2,000 grid networks. A lot of people around the country follow them on Facebook, Instagram, Meetup, but it's just for investors to communicate, potentially find deals together, share information. It's not to sell anything. Nobody's here selling anything. It's really just how do we help each other grow as investors, as real estate investors. So that's the whole point of it. As much free information as possible. Our main focus is building wealth and creating impact for real estate. A lot of people I know that are super high level real estate investors are like the best people when it comes to reinvesting in their communities, helping with like one of the investors I know, Brandon Turner, he is a massive investor. He was a bigger pockets guy, lives in Hawaii now. He's spending a ton of money with the Maui thing going on, helping them getting that back up and running. So, people who invest in real estate, a lot of landlords get a bad rep because there's a lot of bad landlords, and they don't realize if you're a good landlord, you build a strong business, you can significantly reinvest in communities. So that's basically what grid is for, is to do it the right way. We invite people of all levels, no properties to how many ever, and we can learn from each other. So feel free to invite anyone you want. Like I said, there's over 1,000 communities, 2,000 leaders. These are the people that have become millionaires through real estate investing and within the grid network. All right, so who am I? I am William Holder. I run the William Holder Realty team. I also run this group mostly because I want to meet other real estate investors, like-minded real estate investors that either want to do deals or sell me deals, or I could sell them deals. It's really a networking thing for me more than anything. And the people I invest with today, outside of like my sister, were all clients that became friends, and now I invest with them. And some of them are agents on my team. That's the importance of relationship building. You just never know where it's going to go. And now, I own like my one LLC, we own 30 units. That guy started as a client, and we became friends over the years, and now we own 30 units together. We're going to grow that, and that's a couple of my LLCs. So I recommend partnerships. I don't think anyone could do it by themselves. You might be able to, but as you scale, it gets harder and harder. So having help, having someone to for checks and balances, it's a mistake I made early on, and I think it's good to have another pair of eyes to throw on things and help you through. And essentially, that's what I want to accomplish, is finding more and more people to run deals through, to do deals with, and so on. So if you want to connect with us, you can follow me on at William Holder Realty, on the William Holder Realty team on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, text or call me, email. I'm easy to get a hold of, and I'm kind of addicted to checking my email, much to the chagrin of my wife. So feel free to call me anytime. So just want to go around the room real quick and get to know you guys before we jump into this. So start with you, Chris.
soon after that, I started reaching out to my already have to. I started reaching out to him, and I just did my realtor for a couple flips, and also probably 4 of my rental properties, maybe 5.
Mhm.
So I have a few rental properties on my own with my wife, and then I have some with my son. But as he said, it's nice to have a part of my son who is because so the deal is he takes care of all the stuff I don't do. And he's a young buck who wants to keep going, so I figured, you know what? I told him we'll buy as many as he wants to buy. That's where we're at.
There you go. Chris also owns a painting company, so if you ever need anyone to paint, he does a really, really good job. Tim?
Jamaican, food, probably don't have any.
They bought it at the Philly sheriff's sale. Their their first project. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
some
And I recommend it. I mean, I'm a realtor, so I have a vested interest in people using me, but I also recommend asking other realtors. I work with other realtors. I have realtors like I have properties in Carbon County, PA, and I have realtors from there sending me deals. And if they send me a deal and I like it, they represent me. I don't take any commission. They found the deal for me. They've earned their money. And they love that. And in turn, they've referred me people that wanted to sell their house around here. I'll refer them people, and I think that works locally too. If you're a realtor and you come to me with a deal, like my brokers came to me with a 6 unit um, blanket mortgage foreclosure in Philly. It was a great deal. So I was like, yeah, I'll buy it from you guys. Like that's, I think the collaboration. And that's why I invite other realtors to this and uh, lender, anyone that wants to come to learn and share, it's huge. And like he said, the more people you have searching, the more deals you're going to find. So the legal stuff, we're not going to bore you with this, but basically, anything we say here can't be held against us. Don't sue me for anything. I'm just trying to share some info. Uh, and then, I'm recording this through Zoom. I don't have any cameras on you guys, but I do use the Zoom recording, so your voice might be on there as well for some of our stuff. And you're okay with that. So, what is buy and hold? Basically, whether you uncover properties through prospecting, networking, or marketing, uh, getting the phone to ring is critical skill when it comes to a successful real estate investor. Basically, what we were just talking about. You have to have people sending you deals, especially if you're just starting. It's not your full-time thing, and it might never be your full-time thing. So you have a job, you have a life, you have family. You can't always be looking. And if you have a specific buy box and you have people looking for you, deals will come your way. So, yeah. Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming. Um, Deals will come your way. So I always recommend networking as much as possible. When I first became a realtor and I didn't have 2 little kids at home, I was at every event, every night, whenever I could, meeting with other investors, learning the business, talking to people, trying to figure out where there were deals. There's a ton of them. This isn't the only one. There, if you go on Meetup, and I recommend it. Like, check out all of them because you might find a deal. might find a great contractor, which is rare, so yeah. So buy and hold refers to properties you purchase with the intent of owning for a long period of time versus a flip or rehab, which investors typically hold for 6 to 12 months or less, otherwise known as income properties or rental properties. I call flips a necessary evil, right? I'm not a huge fan of flips because they're temporary. And like with what happened during COVID, that whole thing could go away. I know investors that all they did was buy flips. They owned a construction company, they'd fix them up and they'd sell them. Well, COVID started and you couldn't find a flip because we're not just competing with investors on fixer uppers, you were competing with owner occupants, right? The people who couldn't buy a turnkey property were saying, okay, we'll buy a fixer upper at whatever price because we don't need a spread. We could just fix it up and live in it and be happy, right? And it became really impossible to find deals. So a lot of those guys that my first time buyers would buy flips from early on kind of disappeared, and actually we had a wholesaler on our first one, and he was the same thing. He used to just do flips. When COVID happened, that market dried up. That's a business, right? You're investing to not have to work essentially. So if you're a flipper, it's just another job. Now, it can be a very profitable job and it can lead to you investing more. And that's why I do it. So, Chris, you guys, we all do flips to get money to invest in rentals. The negatives of flips are taxes, mostly, a lot of risk, right? And you're dealing with contractors. It's a lot more, it's like a fast paced, crazy 6 months, sometimes 9 months, sometimes 3 years, depending on how bad it goes. And it could turn out to be nothing. It could have been a waste of your time. And then you have to pay the taxes. So the great part about buy and hold is you skip over most of that. You do buy and hold to help you come tax time. And it's an investment vehicle for the future, right? So the richest people in the world, most of them, actually, I was looking at the Arnold documentary on Netflix. I don't know if anybody saw that recently, Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary. And, everyone thought he made all of his money from bodybuilding. And he's like, yeah, in the 60s, I was bodybuilding. I was making some money, but not a whole lot. What he's like, I got rich off of in the 70s is his mentor who showed him how to get into bodybuilding, showed him how to invest in real estate. And he invested in real estate all of the 70s, made millions, and then had the courage to go start doing movies because he didn't need his bodybuilding money anymore. So you never know what people's stories are, but that one kind of rang home for me because you see Arnold and you think, oh, he's been a gazillionaire forever and came from bodybuilding. Bodybuilding got him to the show, but it wasn't going to keep him there, So real estate was one of his keys. So the considerations for buy and hold properties are different from those of a fix and flip, but several issues are the same, right? All right, how much free cash do you have to market for, buy, renovate, hold, and rent the property? There's many ways to go about buying a property, right? You don't have to be all cash. You can be, and if you have that much cash, great. And if you have that much cash, I'm not really sure why you're doing BRRRRs. Maybe go invest it in an apartment building, right? For most people that are doing BRRRRs, they're trying to recycle their money, right? So, if you have a ton of cash, there are easier ways to go about this. But, and I'm talking millions. If you're working with a regular amount of money, understand what market that money works for. So if you're working with 20 grand, where can I buy a property with 20 grand as my down payment, closing costs, holding costs, and refinance costs? Not a whole lot of areas around here. Maybe you got to start looking down south, right? Like you change your location. I'm not saying don't invest. I'm saying change your location. Today, what I tell people is if you don't have 50 to work with, it's really, really hard to even get started. Now, you don't have to have that 50. You could find a private lender, right? You can speak to a family member and say, hey, give me 50 at 10% for 12 months, and I'll give it back to you with the interest. You can get creative. You can pull a line of credit on your home. That's what I did. When I was really getting ramped up, I pulled a line of credit on my primary property and I used that to invest. And I would rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It doesn't have to be, savings. If you have that savings, great. But, and then you can also do a flip and reinvest that money. but understand kind of what your budget gets you, and then use that to pick your location, right? Um, you know, you can market for properties like wholesalers do, so you can actually send out mailers. You can hire an inside sales agent, a virtual inside sales agent from like the Philippines. That happens a lot. Like I get those calls all the time on my properties, and like I respect it. It's a great move. Um, you can find other ways, but that's spending to find. The easiest way is just to look online, right? Look on the MLS, reach out to wholesalers, reach out to agents, search on, Facebook, all these sites, Craigslist, get creative. Or you see a vacant home around the corner from you, go knock on the door, right? Or find out who owns it. So if you're looking to buy and hold, it's a longer term strategy. It's not a I'm going to get rich overnight. And I tell people this all the time. I people see these stories where someone will buy 10 units and they say they're financially free. And that's because that person doesn't have a lot of overhead. Their regular life doesn't dictate high expenses. Where we live, property taxes alone are pretty intolerable. So like if you live in an expensive area, 10 properties aren't going to get you there, especially if they're financed. You own them outright, maybe, but it takes a lot longer to get to financial freedom if you go the method of you're financing all your properties. Now, early on, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I had a conversation with the older gentleman. He called me. He had 10 properties in Philadelphia, and over his life, he would buy a property with, $25,000, $10,000, and he'd want to own cash, and then he rented them out. And now he's retired and he lives off the rental income. But he's getting tired of it. I'm like, why don't you hire a property manager? He's like, well, I've always done it, and I know my tenants, and I think I just want to sell them. And I'm like, man, you're gonna take a pretty big hit come tax time, like selling these properties. And he really had to think about it. And he just said, I always wanted to play it safe. I'm like, well, why don't you pull out, do a blanket mortgage, pull the equity, and then you're not paying taxes on it. And he's like, well, I had a fear of leveraging the properties. He didn't like loans. And sometimes it's a cultural thing. Like I have Muslim clients that don't want any loans on their properties. Like that's, and that's strict with them. And I get it. Like it's part of their culture. I totally understand it. For me, the more I can leverage the property, the better. So, and I'll show you some examples at the end, but if I can hold as much debt on the property as possible, it helps me as a self-employed person write down my income. It also helps me reinvest in other properties, and that's tax-free money. So we'll get to that in a second. What is your tolerance for risk? I always tell people scale gradually, right? Don't start with a 20 unit building, that could possibly tank you forever. Start with a row home, start with hey, how you doing? Hey. Yeah, start with a row home, right? Start with something simple. Start with even if it's a duplex, even if you want to do like a house hack where FHA loans allow you to finance up to a 4 unit building with the intention of living in one of the units, right? So if you said you were a homeowner, right? You went and you got pre-approved for an FHA loan. FHA loans, you can get pre-approved on up to 4 units. I think 1.5 million right now. Like they'll go pretty high. It used to be 600,000. Times have changed, but you can buy a 4 unit building on the main line, live in one of the units, rent out the other three. You don't have to go that big. You can. I just sold a quad in Darby to a young guy, fully renovated property. He had no work to do to it. He moved into one unit, rented out the other three. He's living there for free. Like the rents pay his mortgage, his taxes, his insurance, his holding costs. And this was fully renovated. So, you can get creative, you could start small, but the qualification for that is you can't have more than one FHA loan at a time, right? People think FHA means first time home buyer, and it doesn't. It just means you can't have more than one at a time. Okay. So that's one way to take a low tolerance or low risk tolerance way into investing. If you want to go high, you can go the route of the full blown BRRRR where you buy a fixer upper, you do all the work. We'll get into that. And your tolerance for dealing with rehabs. This is where most people get sunk in the investment world. It's the rehab, right? How much can you deal when it comes to contractors? If you're doing all the work yourself, all right, that's easier because you're the contractor. But then also you're working a job on your projects, right? If you want to manage contractors, I would take a course in that because they are different. I don't know what it is about contractors. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but they are tough to deal with. So understand how to manage your contractors. Understand that if you're going to manage the property yourself, you have to be a property manager now. Do you want to deal with tenants? Do you want to screen tenants? Do you want to take those phone calls? Or do you want to hire a property manager? Right? Understand that, yes, you have agents, but you have to manage them. You have to follow up with them. Hey, you got any properties for me? Same thing with my property managers. I have a couple buildings we have property managers for. They have to call me once a week to give me a rundown on the building. It is a job to manage your property manager too, because they're not, they have hundreds of units. They're not really specifically paying attention to yours unless you make them, right? So how much are you willing to deal with that? And you gauge your risk tolerance based on that. So where do you want to own and hold rental property? This is really important. It's something for me. In the beginning, it was where I could afford. Now it's where do I want to hold these properties? Because, Delaware County, Chester County, Montgomery County, the rules are fairly fair, but Philadelphia, it's really tough to get a tenant out if they're squatting. Like I've had squatters. It's really, really difficult. Like they say go and sit in front of the property and call the police and wait, and they might not come, and that's the process, and you have to go through that until you get to the point that you can then hire a lawyer, and you can spend 10 grand and spend a year of your life trying to get a squatter out of your house. So I've peeled back on the tougher markets in Philadelphia. I'm keeping some of my properties that are in better markets, and I'm investing other places because I don't want that much risk anymore, right? And I learned from my mistakes. Understand the laws where you're renting. New Jersey is one of the toughest when it comes to tenants and landlords. So be careful renting there. If you take a look at the list of places that landlords don't want to own properties, New Jersey high up there. California, some of those areas that have really strict tenant landlord laws. So understand that. How long do you intend on keeping the rental property? This is really big because when you start small, but as you start to scale up, you realize that managing 4 single-family homes is harder than managing one 10-unit building. It is. You have 4 roofs, you have 4 heating systems, you have 4 different tenants, you have 4 sets of capital expenditures you constantly have to pay attention to. Whereas on a 10-unit building, there's 10 properties under the same roof, right? It's way easier to manage. So you're going to say, well, why am I holding on to these single-family properties? I want to 1030. I want to sell them, do a 1031 exchange, and put that money into something bigger and better. So, how long do you intend on keeping these properties? Are these lifetime holds, or are they 2, 5, 7-year holds that you're going to scale up with, right? And if you're planning on scaling up with them, don't invest in an area that has negative appreciation, right? So, some areas don't appreciate well. If you're not planning on keeping these properties forever, don't invest there, right? Because you're going to buy it and then you're going to sell it for exactly what you bought it for. And then what was the point, right? There is a small point, like obviously the mortgage gets paid down, but it's not going to get paid down that much in 7, 8 years, especially with 8.5% interest rates, right? So how will you manage? So I kind of pseudo manage some of my properties. I full blown manage some, and then I have property managers for some. To me, it's a proximity thing. If I'm within 20 minutes of it, I don't mind managing it because I have contractors, I have connections. If I'm an hour away, 2 hours away, 4 hours away, I don't want anything to do with it. I want a full blown property manager that lives locally, understands the area, understands the tenant class. I have, has handyman. Like I don't want I can't call someone to go fix a leaky roof in Pittsburgh. I have no connections, right? So I have to have a property manager, right? So that's what you need to gauge. If you're planning on getting a manager from the beginning, factor for that, right? Property manager is going to cost you 8 to 10% of your monthly rent. So make sure you work that into your equation when you're evaluating the property. I have no problem paying a property manager. Like they're worth it if they're good. but you have to factor that number in early on. Okay. What is your what rate of return are you looking to get from your investment? Right now, you can get a CD for 5% for 18 months. If you're getting a 5% cash on cash return on a investment property, there's easier ways to make money, right? So find out if it's worth the investment. Right now, last year, with interest rates being as low as they were, and banks weren't even giving you 0.25% on your savings account, obviously you're gonna make a ton of money in real estate, right? But manage your risk versus reward in terms of how much you're looking. For me, I want to make $200 per door per month. That's my goal. But what I mean by that is after everything is paid, so principal, interest, taxes, insurance, I put away 5% for capital expenditures, 5% for vacancies, and 10% for my property manager. And then any utilities I pay as the landlord. After all of that is paid and my expenditures are put away, I want to see I'm walking away with at least $200. Now, if I have a partner on that, that's 100 each. Okay with that, right? But that's my number. Is it perfect? No, I have some that are 184 per door and some that are 300 per door, but I want to stay in that range, right? That's my goal, because that plays into, I have a number I want to hit. I know how many doors I have to get there to hit that based on that $200 per door number, right? Just figuring out what you want to make. And then rate of appreciation. For me, this is huge. I've been a realtor full-time for 8 years. Like in 2017 or something, a client called me to sell a house over here in Chester. Not to brag on Chester at all, but I looked at it, and it was like a $30,000 sale. And then I looked back to when they bought it in 1980, and they bought it for $30,000. And I was like, man, if I bought this property and 30 years later I had to sell it for the same amount I paid for it, I'd want to kill myself. And like there are areas very much like that, right? If you're an investor, what's the like you could go the cash flow play where you make a lot of money on the rent because you own the property outright because it was so cheap. But here's the problem. When it comes time to really spend money fixing that property up, you're going to spend more than it's worth on it. You are. Like a brick twin will cost $200,000 to rebuild in this market with our current prices for materials and labor. If that property is only worth $80,000, that's not good, So to me, that's a big thing to factor, right? Now, there are plenty of people that go the cash flow model. That's fine. I get it. All right. Renovating, buy and hold properties. So this is key because you don't want to own, if you're holding a mortgage on it, you don't want to own super high-end properties, right? The return is not going to be great. If you have a $700,000 mortgage on a property, how much money, even if you're renting it for $5,000 a month, what are you really walking away with? Close to nothing, right? So in most cases, you look for lower middle markets. Sometimes people put them in terms of like tenant class. So you have A, which is like you're renting a mansion in Villanova, and then you have B, which is a modest like middle class type home, and you have C, which is that like 250 to 400 to 350 price range, right? Usually works with the numbers. D, you start to get a little iffy, 150 to around here at least, 150 to 250. Now this ranges in areas. Obviously in New York, a D class property could be $1 million property, right? In New York City. Here it's a little different. You want to gauge your risk on the tenant versus your return. For me, I personally don't even look at flips with an ARV over 400 right now, like I said, because the interest is so high that it'll be tough to make any money on it. Same kind of goes for rentals. Unless it's a multi-unit, I'm not looking at anything that expensive, right? So understand that, yeah, and high-end properties are nearly impossible to find at a price point that will support the rent. If you bought a property in Swarthmore for, $900,000 and the property taxes are 20 grand, how are you making money on the rent? It's just not going to happen. So there's perfect example. There's a 5-unit that just sold, the corner property in Swarthmore where the Dunkin' Donuts is right here. Went up for sale. The person's owned it since I think in 2005 they bought it for $750 and they just sold it for 1.5. I ran the numbers on it. if you have a mortgage on it, it does not cash flow. You have to own it cash, right? Because the taxes are 30 grand, and the the Dunkin' Donuts has a 10 more years left on their lease. But even still, if you have a mortgage on it, it's not cash flowing. It's barely breaking even. Now, for that person, it was an appreciation play. They probably owned it cash and they just cashed out at twice what it was worth. And they're probably going to 1031 that money and go buy something even bigger. So, great investment. I mean, if you told me I could put $750,000 into something in 2005 and in 2023 I'd get $1.5 million out of it, I think anybody would jump on that if you had $750,000, right? That scales. So, great investment for appreciation, okay for cash flow if you don't have a mortgage, but if you have to buy it with a mortgage now, it's negative cash flow, right? Any questions about anything I've gone over so far?
Just had cash on hand and that probably just said. And then they made $200-300 on top of it. I donated the property back. It was like, well, sure, we had $300. I wouldn't buy it to try to write the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And the higher end the property, the less risk you take. Like someone who could afford the rent to initially get into that property probably has good credit, income. They kind of care about that stuff. So, not saying people that or don't, but there's a less instance of it. So I don't. If you have the money and you can be a buy and hold cash investor, 100% do it. I think it's the safest investment. Like, I'm not a financial market guy. I watched the market crash in 2008 and like my father-in-law lose half his, retirement and all of that. And I was in banking at the time, people coming crying. And I'm like, man, and I was, much younger and didn't really 100% grasp it, but it kind of set the stage for me that I don't want anything that I don't understand when it comes to investing. And like, that's why it's always been real estate for me. I have investments, but I don't pay any attention to them. Real estate's what I pay attention to, right? Because I have no control over it. And that's why over the last 3 years, when everyone came to me and they're like, you need to buy crypto and NFTs, I'm like, I don't know what any of that is. And if you can't explain it to me, I'm not investing in it. And nobody can. Like, I still don't know. Nobody else can tell me what crypto is. So maybe it's great. I don't know. I could be 100% wrong. Doesn't seem to be so right now, though, right? So real estate to me is the safest investments in the right area, right? Sure. hmm Yeah. So 5 year, I want to cash flow $1,000 a month after all expenses. Yeah. And that's the other thing too. With a single family, if your tenant leaves, you're 100% vacant. Whereas a 5 unit, if your tenant leaves, you're 20% vacant. That is easier to stomach, right? And you obviously want to make sure your leases are stacked in a way that you don't have multiple vacancies at a time, but way less risk in my opinion. All right, so this is another thing I get trapped in all the time. If you're a flipper or you own properties, especially when you first get started, a lot of people think of it as like, well, would I want to live there? And you cannot do that, okay? Because you will overspend 100%. Like, you will sink your budget because you start opening up walls and you're like, well, I would blow that wall out because I want to open concept. And then you need an engineer and then you need more permits. And then all of a sudden your budget's going up and your profit's going down. The same thing happens for your rentals, right? So I'm not saying be cheap. I like my rentals to look nice, but I am saying if you could save the cabinets, save the cabinets. If you can uh, rip up the carpets and refinish the floors, refinish them. You don't have to put in high-end laminate flooring or whatever, they're trying to sell you. Like, if the windows are functional, save them. Like, you don't have, because they're wood, it isn't the end of the world. They just have to work, right? So you can fix them versus repair, right? Um, you know, Obviously you want to make sure the roof is good. You want to make sure your heater isn't going to conk out on you year one because of the way you're stacking your expenses. The way when you're putting away your 5% for capital expenditures, you're planning on a bigger repair happening eventually. Eventually the roof's going to go. Eventually the heating system's going to go. But if it goes year one or year two, you now are putting money into the property, right? Because you don't have enough saved up. So if you buy a property and the roof is iffy, replace it. Like, don't try to patch it, just replace it, make it your upfront budget cost so you can leave that in the property. Same thing with the furnace. Electrical, safety issue for me, I think that's important. But I would pay attention to all those things. Also, especially in an area like ours where all the plumbing is super old, I recommend getting sewer line insurance on all your properties. All right. I try to scope every property I buy, but these cast iron sewer lines, they are going to go eventually. It's $8 a month. I can have it for 20 years. And if it goes, it's still a positive for me. All right. So that's just a little tip. I recommend doing that. Just try to keep your repairs, your cosmetic repairs lower, but your system repairs, get them done so that from the beginning you have time. You'll see a lot of people, a lot of like foreign investors will go in and buy an entire new construction neighborhood and then sell it right before all the roofs go. Like year 19, they're moving them all out, and these properties have tripled in value, and they've literally had to do nothing for 20 years because the systems lasted. It's brilliant, right? It's the same idea. The only exception is if the place needs a full renovation. So obviously it needs to be gutted. That's fine. Just budget for it, right? So budget for the fact that I'm not going to get in and out of this property. I'm probably going to be working on it for 9 months, and then I can get out. And a lot of the deals you find today are more extensive renovations because those are the ones that do scare off your owner occupants. So you're probably going to have to do some more extensive renovations. Property management. So before I jump into that, any questions about anything we just went over? Mhm. 5% CapEx, 5% vacancies, and 10% property management. Yeah, because you're going to have vacancies. So in that vacant month, you still have to pay the mortgage, you still have to pay the taxes, and you should still be paying yourself a profit. So if you're putting away enough, eventually when that vacancy happens, it'll be okay. The one thing a lot of people get trapped on, I get trapped on all the time and I forget it, is if I'm hiring a property manager, when they rent that property, they're taking a month's rent up front. So you're really making 11 months rent for that property, not 12 on that lease. Personally, I prefer to extend the lease, try to get a 2-year lease or a 13-month lease, something like that, just to offset that a bit. But it's something to factor. If you use a property manager or even a real estate agent, it's 1 month to rent the property, right? So, and yeah, you're going to mitigate your risk by using a professional, but you're paying for it. So factor that into your equation. So like I said, third-party property managers will cost about 8 to 10%. You can negotiate with some of them. I got some people, a big company out in Pittsburgh or in Pottstown that does mine for 7, because we gave them like a nice property, and so you can negotiate, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter as long as they're really good at their job, right? And when you become a high enough level investor, the game is managing your property managers, right? So have that call set with them every week. Make sure they're filling your vacancies. Check out their listings to make sure they're not using their phone to take pictures of your property. Like, use nice pictures. Market my property like you want to get top end rent for it. You do have to get on them. Make sure they're not sitting on tenants that aren't paying too long. If you get a tenant that's back 2 months, it's really hard for them to catch up. It needs to be like, it's almost impossible. I've never had a scenario where it worked out where I was Mr. Nice Guy, and I've done this plenty of times. And then 2 months in, I still have to get them out. And now I'm 3 months behind on rent because I got to put someone else in. Like, it just never works out. So if your tenant is 10 days, they should be getting a notice. Like, make sure your property manager is doing everything they should be doing for you. But they do a lot. They handle the marketing, the credit and background checks, the rent collections, the repairs. I'd be careful with repairs. Don't just let them send their guy out, because their guy will charge you a fee and then do whatever they want. I'd want to know exactly what they're doing, and I would want to break down of materials and expenses. I still ask for it because, like you send them out to fix a broken glass on a door and they want to replace the entire door. Well, no, we can get glass for the door. Like, that, and I get it. You have to order the glass, you got to put a piece of wood up, and you have to wait. Okay, it's costing me half the price. I'll wait. Like, so do pay attention to that stuff too, because it's not their money they're spending; it's yours, right? So, a good property manager should send detailed monthly reports of income and expenses. Should get a report showing all the income coming in, expenses going out. Keep rents at or just below market rates to encourage renewals and less vacancy. So, especially in a market where interest rates are as high as they are, you don't want to bleed your tenants. I mean, they're going to leave and they're going to find somewhere cheaper to rent. And then it's going to cost you a full month to get the place re-rented, and also maybe even more if it takes longer to re-rent it. Charge fair rents. Like, don't shoot for the moon right now. During COVID, sure, when there were bidding wars for apartments, okay. But now things are tightening up. Be fair with your rents, and ask your property manager too. It's self-serving for them for vacancies because they get to fill the unit and they get another month's rent. It's a commission for them. So you do have to fight that battle with your property manager. And then always do credit and background checks. I mean, just for even your friend, your family friend, do it. Like, that's when you run into problems. You don't want like a sex offender in your building, and that's a huge deal. So make sure you do your background. Because you're liable as the landlord. So never accept an excuse or partial payment. An excuse or a partial payment. That's what I was talking about. Like, it starts to build up, and eventually they're gonna be 2 months late, and you're now 3 months screwed. So loan considerations. All right. So most investment property loans require 25% equity on the purchase price or appraised value. You can get some lenders like in Philly, PFCU does 80%, but for the most part, most lenders want 25% equity, right? This is where the BRRRR method gets really interesting, and I'll show you some examples of that. But when you're using the BRRRR method, you buy a property, you want to buy it at the value that allows you to purchase it, renovate it, rent it, and refinance it and leave no money in the property, right? Or very little. So here's an easy example. You buy a property for $30,000. It needs $30,000 in work, so you're $60,000 into it. And the closing costs, your holding costs, your rental costs, your refinance costs are going to run you 15 grand. So you're 75 all in. Properties fixed up in that market are selling for 100. So when you're done, you can go to the bank and say, hey, my property is now worth 100. I'm 75 into it. I'd like my 75% back. That's a BRRRR, right? That's one half of the equation. The other half is making sure it's profitable. So you can do all of that, and then the mortgage is too expensive and the rents don't cover your expenses. So you have to do both sides of the equation. That's a really simple example. And it's a property I've physically done just like that. It's awesome, right? If you can find that deal in this market, jump all over it. Even if you have to leave $5,000 in the deal, are you going to complain that you own a property for 5 grand? No, like it would have cost you 20 if you bought that property turnkey. So you found $100,000 property that was turnkey. You'd have to put 25% down. That's $25,000, and closing costs $30,000. 30 versus none. That's the beauty of the BRRRR, and it scales. It's not just on single family. That goes all the way up to hotels, right? And we'll get to that. So if you're buying the property in your own name, you're only allowed to have 10 mortgages. They're called conforming mortgages or Fannie mortgages on your credit. So if you went to the bank, even if it's the same bank you're using or a different bank, and you have 10 rental properties, 10 mortgages, they'll say we can't lend you anymore, right? That's why you should buy in LLCs, because there's no limit to the LLCs. They're non-conforming, right? There are ways around that. You can do a blanket mortgage and move them all into one mortgage and then get fancy, but why risk it? Like, why put the risk in your name? Get it under an LLC, right? So any questions about those two? Yeah.
You ever done,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
so
It's basically the second half of the BRRRR. So the lender just wants to know that your expenses are covered. Most lenders look for a 1.25 DSCR. So they basically want to know the rents are 1.25 above what your expenses are, right? That way, if they have to foreclose on you, they can afford to pay a property manager to run it while they retake the property, right? Some are a little bit more aggressive, but about 1.25. And it's the SDR is great because the SDR stands for debt service coverage ratio. And basically, if you're not someone that it has like 2 years tax returns or 1099 W2 income, you can go to a bank and say, hey, I have this property, it's worth this much, I'd like a loan for this much, here are the income and expenses, and the bank will evaluate it strictly on the property. It'll look at you a little bit, especially if you're a newer investor. But if you're like a super experienced investor, all they care about is the property, right? And so it's easier to get financing. Usually they look for more equity. So they usually like 70% or like 65%. They might not go to 75 because they want to leverage like if they have to foreclose. But yeah, yep. All right. Mhm. I'll say it's your call, but here's how I look at it. I look at it as, is the LLC worth suing, or is my insurance worth suing? Right? I've never had a tenant sue me, and I've been in rooms with thousands of landlords that said there no tenants have ever sued them. But the reality is, it could happen. And you have insurance on each of your properties. You have insurance on your LLCs. You have blanket. You have umbrella policies. So if I own an LLC and there's 5 properties in there, but these properties are only worth 100 grand and each, and I owe 75% on each of them. There's like $125,000 in equity between those properties, something like that. And if a tenant's going to come after me, what are they going to sue first? Are they going to sue that LLC, which is only worth $125,000, or are they going to sue my insurance, which is $1 million policy, right? They're going to go after my insurance. When you get to the point, in my opinion, that the equity in the business is worth more than your insurance, I think you should diversify. I think then you should start a new LLC, right? I prefer the insurance to be sued over me, So that's how I look at it. I've heard plenty of other ways. The other problem too is it's expensive to maintain LLCs, like to start a new one, to have your accountant do the taxes. Like I'm switching accountants right now because they just keep going up in price. I don't know why. It's the same amount of work. And it's crazy what they charge you to manage these. So then I was factoring in my accounting on my evaluations and it was ruining deals for me. I'm like, on these smaller LLCs, they don't make sense if I'm spending $1,300 to get my taxes done. It's only making $2,400 a year, like, on the property. Like, why? So that's, and in this case, I just had to get a cheaper accountant, just as good. But you start to risk versus reward look at it. Now that's just my opinion. The other good thing about using an LLC is banks, regular residential lenders have something called a seasoning period, where if I went to a bank and I bought a home in my name, even if it's a fixer upper, and they won't let you buy too much of a fixer upper, but let's say I bought it and I put a new kitchen in right away, and I went to that bank and I'm like, hey, I just put 50 grand into my kitchen. I bought my house for 300. I think it's worth 400 now. They don't care until month 13, right? It's a seasoning period. They want 12 payments until they will look at the new value, right? Your sale price is your value until you're 12 months in, when it's a regular conforming loan in your name. Under LLCs, those lenders, most of them don't care. Some of them do have seasoning periods, like 6 months, but most of the lenders I work with will, if I come 60 days in and I'm like, hey, I'm done with this property, they'll appraise it at the new market value, right? They don't have that seasoning period. So that's another benefit of going with an LLC. Yeah. Or, well, no, but yeah, at least it's a piece of paper, right? So yeah. So that's uh, so yeah. Build your brand. What is your message? I found great deals on Facebook from friends and family who I just posted, hey, I just finished this great flip. I'm looking for the next one. And someone will post, hey, my aunt's brother, is an alcoholic and won't leave the house. Like, will you deal with this house? Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Like that, I know there's a deal there, right? I'm solving their problem by handling the brother, getting him a case of beer to leave the house or something, and they don't want to deal with it, right? I've dealt with it, so I'll handle that. That's a good way to find deals. People, agents will call me who I've worked with before on, I work with them. They enjoyed working with me. I'm like, hey, if you ever have a good deal, please let me know. I'll buy it. Like, I'll buy it. You can represent me. That's like, I like being known as an agent that you come to with deals, right? Or a person that you come to with deals, just like you. Like you guys are going to do. Come to me with a deal and I'll find a way to make it work if the numbers make sense. All right. I'm not just going to buy anything. But so that to me is a brand. If you're known as a good investor to work with, you value those relationships. So you're not going to let them bring the deal to you and then they go have their favorite agent sell it. Like that's not fair. They should reciprocate, right? Or I don't know, like a partnership, you go get your real estate license and you go sell it. Well, hey, I just brought you that deal. Like, help me out here, man. That's like the way to look at it. Same thing works for your property manager. Property managers have good deals because they're working with other landlords. Some of them don't want to own their properties anymore. Their property managers are going to reach out to their clients first. They're going to go to their database of landlords. Say, hey, anyone want to buy this? We're going to get the full 6% if we sell it in-house. Talk to your property managers, have good relationships with them because they'll come to you if they like working with you. There are ways to generate leads, like we've talked about in multiple ones, but prospecting is one. Networking, I think, is one of the biggest. I don't market as a real estate investor. To me, like my name is my brand. So like I just think people know me as something because I put that out there. But I don't spend on marketing is what I mean. So I'm not like sending out flyers to neighborhoods saying I'll buy your house, or I'm not going and stapling signs to post like, telephone poles and all that stuff. That's not me, but I get it. It can be profitable. So you can do that as well. Just like any business, you should have a good database. So and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, you could just start a spreadsheet. If you work with a certain amount of contractors, a certain amount of agents, and a certain amount of realtors, keep a list of them and follow up with them. Like that list starts pretty small, but as you grow your network, it becomes huge. We have 5,000 people in our database now. Like if I didn't have a database, it would be a nightmare, right? So start managing it from a small level. When I first started, it was a spreadsheet. Then I had a cheap CRM. Now I have a more extensive CRM. Even as a real estate investor, that's huge. It's good for your tenants too. Put your tenants in there, and there's sites you can use. I use Rent Ready to manage my properties that I still manage. So, and that to me is like my tenant CRM. I can go in there, I can see who the tenants are, when things are due, set up automatic responses. I think it's a great system. They, send their rent through ACH. It's awesome. Budget and track marketing activities. So again, this is all on if you want to spend on finding deals. Got to make sure the return is there. So if you're spending $5,000 on mailers that month and you've made no deals for a year, maybe stop spending $5,000 on mailers and go knock on doors. Be purposeful. So you can waste a lot of valuable time and money if you don't have a great plan or model to copy and implement. I now have 3 tiers for my rentals and for my flips: low end, middle, and high end. It's the same finishes. I am not redoing everything over and over and over again anymore. I thought being cute and spending more and getting fancy with like this fireplace and stuff would make a huge difference. And in the end, it just cost me time and money. If you get to the super high end stuff, sure, hire a designer and go crazy. But if you're talking about an average rental and you're using the same product over and over, it gets really easy to evaluate that deal if you know what you're paying per square foot for flooring and to paint and for the appliances, the same package over and over again, right? So make it easy, simplify it, and it'll become way easier to do. It takes way less time. Okay, so I do have some examples to show you guys, but before we jump into that, what'd you learn today that created a shift in the way you're thinking? Anything you want to implement? Yeah, and I've been telling you to do that for a while, but at a certain point, it kind of gets boring to keep doing the single families and the duplexes and the triplex. They're fine, but you start to realize that it's much easier. Like I have a couple 6 units, I have a 10 unit and a 10 unit, and I'm closing on an 11 unit. They are easier to manage than my single family properties. Like I have property managers for them. Again, it's one roof. There's less calls for leaks, wet basements, like less things to deal with when it's a building, right? Um, and the simpler the building, the better. So if it could be a rectangular box, that's amazing, right? Like I have some weird properties in Carbon County that there's like 3 roofs and different levels, and it just gets wonky. So like the simpler the box, the better. You could make the units nice, so like spend nice flooring, do things like that, but the actual building itself, keep it simple, right? And you could start any level. I'm closing on a 11 unit in 2 weeks in out by Pittsburgh for $375,000. Just because I set a number I was looking for, and I found it. Now they had it at 450, and I offered 325, and we met somewhere. But there are deals out there. Now, is it an area I'm going to go manage the property in? No, right? Like not. But is it a great deal? Does it cash flow? Did I run the numbers? Does it make a ton of sense? Absolutely. I like PA because I know the laws. I'm licensed here. It's easier for me to work in PA. Will I expand to other states eventually? Probably at some point, but I mean, there's so many deals here. Like, why do I have to really? It's expensive around here, so understand that. And spread out a bit if you have to. And uh, find ways to mitigate your time. So, like for me, or to manage your time. So for me, if I'm like that property is 4 hours away, I'm not going to go see it unless I know I have it. So I started to negotiate with the agent early on. And when we came to a number, said, okay, let's lock it up, but I want 14 days to inspect. You could do 30 days. Commercial buildings, they'll give you more time. That way I could schedule my inspection. I could be there for the inspection. And that's the last time I'm going to go to that property. Last time, first and last. I went for the inspection. I made my scope of work. I know what I plan on doing there. I found my property manager before I even got for the inspection, and I already sent them the scope of work. I'm not going to go back there. I have no reason to go back there. I want to get updated pictures. I want to make sure that there are trees growing in my gutters. I will manage my property, but I don't have to be there. I didn't waste 4 hours there and 4 hours or 5 hours there and 5 hours back before I knew I had it, right? And that started with me buying properties an hour and a half away. Like I was running out there, and I have a job. My job is to sell residential real estate. I was wasting time doing that when I could have just had those agents go do a video walkthrough for me, or FaceTime me while they're there. And if it's a good deal, we'll put it under contract and I'll come see it during inspections, right? Like, obviously, if it's right around here, I'll run out and check it out. But understand there's ways, we have technology, there's ways around spending a ton of time doing this stuff. Okay. So I have a few examples I wanted to show really quickly. Yes. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So this is actually a property I purchased in 2018. This is on an LLC I have with my sister. It was in Southwest Philadelphia. At the time, it's all I could afford, right? So I went with what I can afford. Uh, the seller wanted $35,000, and I went there to actually list the property for her, and she said, "I don't want anyone walking through my property." And I'm like, "Well, how am I supposed to sell it if I can't show it?" And she's like, "Well, would you buy it?" And I'm like, "Maybe," like. So then I started to think, well, I could do this deal. I talked to my sister. We put the money together. We bought it for 35. Um, we had $3,000 in closing costs because we bought it cash. If you're financing, it's a little bit more money, so factor for that. Figure out what your closing costs are. Uh, I knew I had about $2,000 in holding costs, which is the insurance. You have to have builder's risk insurance when you're doing work. You don't have to, but it's the right way to do it. I had utility bills. They found a body in a suitcase behind the property during the project that shut it down. You never know what's going to happen. That happened, right? There was like this crazy smell, and the contractors thought it was the neighbors, and the neighbors thought it was our property. It turns out there was a body in a suitcase that was rotting away in the summer. So that shut us down for a little bit. So we had some holding costs, right? Uh, I had a renovation budget of 33,000. Of course, it started at 28 and ended up at 33 because always does. So factor for reserves at least 10%. If your contractor says it's 50,000, it's usually at least 55, right? So factor for reserves. And then, my appliances, and I factored for how much to refinance. It cost me about $2,500 to refinance because you had to do title insurance and everything when you refinance. So it costs money and an appraisal. So I put all the money in. I was about 77, 78 into it. I knew it was worth $100,000. This is where a good agent could come in handy. You don't need to know every neighborhood. Your agent does. So ask him, hey, when this is fixed up, what would you be able to sell this for? And I knew it was worth 100. I went to a bank. I said, hey, I'm 75 into this. They gave me a loan for 75%. I got my 75,000 back. I left $2,800 in the deal. And we'll get into the profit and the rent. But at the time, I rented it for like $1,000 a month. Now the rent's $1,250 a month. Rent goes up because taxes go up, maintenance goes up. You have to raise your rents, even if it's 3%. You have to raise them, or else you're paying the difference, right? And over time, it became a good property. The other thing that was great about it is in 2018, it appraised for $100,000. Last year, I found a duplex that I wanted to buy with the same LLC, but we didn't have 40,000 in the LLC. So I went to a bank and said, hey, I have this property in Southwest Philadelphia that I have a mortgage of $72,000 on at this point. I think it's worth 150 now based on the comps. They came out, they appraised it, they agreed. They gave me 75% of 150. So I paid off my first mortgage. I took that money out and I went and bought a second property. The great part of that is that's tax-free money. It is a loan on your property. It's why Elon Musk pays himself in shares or loans, so he doesn't have to pay taxes on it. That's if you are taking a loan out on it, and I'm not an accountant, so he does have to pay some tax. I don't know, but not as much as you would expect someone making that much money. But if you borrow on a property, it's a loan. It's not income, right? So I would rather borrow on a property than sell it. Because if I sell it, I have to pay capital gains. If I have to pay capital gains, I mean, that's 30, 35% easy, whereas I borrowed 40 out of it. And because I raised my rents along the way, it covered it. If I had kept the rents the same, I wouldn't have had that opportunity, right? Because using DSCR or any of these other things, they would say, well, the rent doesn't cover the mortgage and the taxes and leave you with enough, right? The new mortgage. So I was able to do that. I got that much appreciation, which is $12,500 a year for a property that's paying for itself. I put a new roof on when I bought it. I put a new heater when I bought it, and I painted the cabinets. I made it nice, but I didn't spend a ton of money. Now, can you find a deal like this today? Probably not. Like it's a lot hard to find a $35,000 property, in an area that you won't get murdered. But it like this, there are deals kind of that scale, that you can find like that. So this is a simple version. This was a row home. Very simple, easy project. Now let me show you how that scales. I can make this bigger. Okay, so this is a little bit more complicated of a sheet, right? But it's the same thing. All you're looking for are what's your total income, right? So we bought this property in Pottstown. We paid $540,000 for it. I did it with two partners. So we split, our down payment. We could have borrowed the down payment. There was other ways to do it too. And then we could have gotten a loan to fix the property up as well. So you can get a loan that's 80% of the purchase price or 75% of the purchase price and 100% of the renovation costs. Tons of lenders that'll give you that. So you don't have to come up with your renovation costs either. And we could have done that. On this one, we didn't. Going forward, I'm going to more. But when we bought it, the rent, it was a aging landlord, didn't want to deal with the property anymore. It was kind of letting the tenants stop paying and, not fixing up the units. I think the property was making like 60-something thousand dollars a year. So we bought it at that number. And since then, we put money into it. It's been 2 years, it's been a project. Not all of the units. We probably renovated 7 of the 10. In some fashion, some full guts, some, paint, carpets. And we've gotten the rents up to $107,000. Now, the money we put into it was about $100,000. So we bought it for $540, put 100 into it. That was $640. We're about to refinance again, and it just appraised for $900. Why did it appraise for $900? Because I raised the rents to $107,000 annually, right? Each one of those units that I fixed up, we raised the rents. We brought them to market value. I put a coin-operated washer and dryer in there. So there's $300 a month coming from that. Every penny counts. Here's why. So your rent goes up. You still have all your fixed expenses. So you have your taxes, my sewer line coverage, always have that. Comcast, we pay for cameras. That's the internet for the cameras. I don't pay for the tenants. We cover the water and sewer because it's one line for the whole building. So it's just easier. We cover the trash, my property insurance, registration fees. I factor for that because, every year I have to do rental permits on each unit. So I have to factor for that. So I have my fixed expenses. Those expenses really shouldn't change too much year over year, right? Your taxes go up a little bit. Your insurance might go up a tiny bit. Your water and sewer might go up a tiny bit. But for the most part, those numbers should stay about the same. Then I have my variable expenses. So I have our vacancies. I put away 5%. So every month the rent comes in, 5% goes away. We have a management fee. I have 9% on there. We're actually paying 7%. So that's the 7,500 is really 7%, not 9%. And then my 5% for repairs and expenses. So every year I'm putting away $5,000 for repairs and $5,000 for vacancies. 2-3 years in, I'm going to have 15 grand. So if the roof goes year 10, I'm good, right? That's what I'm always looking at is what am I going to need this money for? If I'm not putting it away, when it comes up, I'm not taking it out of my own pocket, right? So I have my variable expenses. Now, your net operating expense, your NOI, is your fixed expenses or your income minus your fixed expenses and your variable expenses. So the building actually makes almost $69,000 a year, right? At a value of $900,000, that's a cap rate of 7.65. That's the capitalization rate for this property. The bank wants to see a cap rate within that market. So in this market, there's properties trading at 7.5% to 10%. We're in that range, right? So the bank agrees with me. Hey, at 900,000, yeah, you have a cap rate that works for us. We'll send an appraiser out to confirm, but you have to remember there's not a whole lot of 10-unit buildings in any one town trading. There's a ton of single-family homes, there's a bunch of duplexes, a little bit less triplex, and there's some quads. Once you get over 4 units, it's rare that there's a sale. So an appraiser can't go back 12 months and find a sale of a 10-unit property. So banks had to figure out, well, how do we value these properties? We value it using the cap rate. How much income is it making versus expenses, right? And if I raise that number to $1 million and it dropped under 7.5, then they don't think it's worth it. You know, if my income goes up though, my cap rate goes up, I can raise my value. And that's a simple way to do a commercial BRRRR. So you could buy a rental property that's undermanaged, do no work, just raise the rents. And all of a sudden your property is worth more because of your cap rate, right? You have to factor your debt service. So we have 2 mortgages on it that we're paying that. So our annual profit is only that now. It's 3 parts, it's split 3 ways, and it's a little bit less than that, like $185 per door. But it'll get there, right? My rents are going to be going up. I'll get there. And I know it's at a 1.41 DSCR ratio. So I know anytime I want to go refinance this, I won't have a problem. This is the same thing as a BRRRR. It's the exact same thing. It's just on a bigger building. And they use this for 20, 30, 50, 100 unit buildings, you know, for the most part. You know, I've never done 100 unit buildings, so I don't know anymore, but for the most part, this is what it is. So if you can do it on a single family, you can do it on bigger properties. It's just understanding the numbers, right? When you're doing a BRRRR on a multifamily over 4 units, you're looking for something that has value add. So you're looking for something that tired landlord hasn't fixed up the units, it hasn't changed the rents. You want to be careful. You don't want to buy, like I just looked at a property last night in Scranton. It was a 3 unit and under rented, priced well, but the landlord didn't have any leases. He's like, oh, my tenants are good, you know, they pay. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to touch this. Like I have 3 squatters essentially is what you're telling me. Like, and you know, I sent an agent out there to look that lives out there to do the videos for me. And in the one video, the tenant's like, well, I'm not paying any more than I'm currently paying. You know, if I had bought that building, I would have had a squatter, you know, like $500 a month is not market rent for that unit. It should be like $900 a month, you know, that. So pay attention to what you're buying, find the leases, get what's called a T12. So a trailing 12 months of income and expenses. When it's a duplex or triplex, that stuff really might not matter as much. But when you get to like this many units, make sure you know what's going in and out, because the landlord might forget to mention that he filed 3 insurance claims, and insurance on this building is $8,000 a year now, not $4,000 a year. Or he pays for the heat for the entire building. You thought it was individual, and now you have a $10,000 expense you weren't expecting, you know. So it's a risk thing, right? For a property, a big property, yes, I want to see everything. If there's certain things missing that I'm okay with taking the risk on, sure, I'll still buy it. But like a 3 unit where none of them have leases, that's 100% risk for me. Like I want nothing to do with that, right? If 2 of them had a lease and 1 didn't, all right, maybe I could figure this out. It's like, what kind of makes sense? You want to check as many of your boxes as possible. You're never going to check all of them, right? If the deal checked all your boxes, it's probably checking everyone else's boxes, right? And you're gonna have competition. I don't want competition. So that's you know, I'd base that on a building by building thing. But the bigger the building, think about it, the more expenses that can be hidden. And your cap rate, when you're buying it, you're like, oh, it's an 8 cap and I can make it a 12 cap. But then when you realize what the actual expenses are, it was really a 5 cap. And all you can make it is an 8 cap. And then it's gonna be really hard to refinance that. So questions? I'd like them to give me a list of referrals to call. So I want to talk to other people that they manage their properties, and a good property managers will. I don't look at reviews, because if you ever look at a property manager review, none of them have good reviews. Why? Because tenants hate them. So they're going to have 500 1-star reviews, because what tenant likes their property manager, right? What tenant likes their landlord for the most part. So I don't care really so much about the reviews. I want to see they have online presence for sure. You know, I want to see they're a legitimate company. I'd like to talk to other people that they manage their buildings. I'd like to see that they manage at least an amount in the area I'm in. So they need to know the market they're managing. You know, if they are used to managing high-end stuff and I'm buying a cheaper building, they're probably going to be frazzled by the issues that come up you know. That's kind of it for me, like those things. But for the most part, if I can at least talk to three of their current clients that aren't tenants but are actual landlords, it's usually a good sign for me. Anything else? This is this is up there. This isn't as complicated as it gets, but it's up there. Um, I I'm not really a spreadsheet guy, but getting into real estate kind of makes you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Real estate investing isn't sexy, man. It's spreadsheets. It's like you're an accountant for real estate, and it does get boring sometimes. A lot of the times, and honestly, boring's good. That means your building isn't burning down. Like boring's fine. If the numbers work here, I need to see they work here before I even see the property. And for the most part, you can find this out by just asking for copies of the leases or a trailing 12 months of expenses. You can find most of this information out within a half-hour conversation with the listing agent, or with your agent having with the listing agent. You throw it on your sheet. If it's a no, it's a no, hard pass. And like you have to be unemotional about it. It's like numbers work great. If they don't, is there a creative way to make them work? Maybe there's something being underutilized in the building that I didn't think of. But if they don't work, next, you get really, really comfortable with saying next. Yeah, so the original purchase was not, but we actually did a second mortgage to recoup our initial investment, and the same bank gave us the second mortgage. The reason I didn't touch my first mortgage because it was 4%, and I was like, I'm never touching this. And the second, is at whatever the rate was at the time, like 6% or something. But the other thing is, a lot of commercial loans are only sometimes 5 or 7 year terms, sometimes even 3 years. So every 5 years, you're usually refinancing before it balloons. And that's another reason you should be raising your rents, because if things happen like have happened in the last 12 months where investors were paying 4%, now they're paying 8.5%, and you haven't raised your rent, it's a tanked investment. You're losing money if you had to refinance right now. Kind of depends on the risk tolerance of the lender, like what appetite they have for risk. Right now, a lot of lenders are tightening up because a lot of them are closing, not a whole lot of loans happening. So it's tougher to get a loan right now. Just in my personal experience, I haven't had this hard of a time getting simple loans. It seems like all of these lenders are being really, really tight right now. It is what it is. But I think it just depends on the appetite of the lender, and they do base it on you personally. So obviously, if you have a lot of equity, a lot of assets, they're going to give you more risk. They want to see you have life insurance. Like things like that. Every time you do a commercial loan, they ask for a personal financial statement. They want to see that you're not too risky. And if you die, something's there to cover it, right? So those are all things that make you more lendable. Yeah. They ask you if you have kids on there. They can't ask you that on a regular home purchase. That's discrimination. But commercial, they can ask that because if you have kids, you're less likely to mess the whole thing up, right? At least from some people. So yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah. So I love the BRRRR method. I could talk about it for hours because it's what's gotten me to the show. Yes, yeah, well in advance. Um, yeah, so 1031s, there are companies assigned to be 1031 exchange companies. You can't just put it in your own account. The money will never touch your account. It goes from the title company you close at to the 1031 exchange company and sits there. And you have 45 days to identify the property you're putting the money into. It has to be of equal or greater value. So it's monopoly. They want to see you rolling up, right? What's that? That's with your accountant when you're doing your taxes. That's like later after the end of the year. But during the actual process, they want that money to go and be handed out.
So you put this have to be one property or people or do you buy three different?
I'm pretty sure you could buy multiple. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% certain of that, but I think I've asked that question before, and I'm pretty sure it's multiple. They just have to add up to people who can work more. Yeah. Yeah. And you could put it into like a joint venture too. It doesn't like if you know. Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually doing one right now with a client. The property we're buying in Pittsburgh, half of the money is coming from his 1031 into a property we're buying together. And it's great. I mean, he and uh so it all goes back to monopoly, right? They want to see you rolling it forward. That's why they're not taxing you on it because they expect in the end they're going to get a massive hit off of you, right? You're going to appreciate each one of these properties over 28 years or whatever. And at the end, you pass away, you're supposed to pay an inheritance tax, which is a smack in the face, right? And that's where you get a trust. And that we can go into more and more stuff after that. But there are plenty of ways to hide money legally. Yeah, I do. Some agents, I know a lot of agents that don't because they don't take the risk. But I don't like to cut corners on flips because I've been in 700 home inspections and inspectors will find it. So I do it right, and I have the proper insurance. I do represent myself. I don't pay myself a commission. I cover my expenses, but I pay the buyer's agent a commission. But I represent myself. Yeah. Yes. 100%. Yeah, you have to put it in the public and the private comments and the seller's disclosure that the agent has a financial interest in the property, and don't it makes no sense to hide it. Yeah. I've never had it happen. And honestly, the agent's taking more risk doing it that way, right? So if I buy a property and I flip it and I sell it, not only am I risking being sued, I'm risking my real estate license like coming into question. That's my livelihood. So maybe I'm stupid for doing it, but it's a lot more risk, honestly. And I think you're adding a layer of protection. Now, it, it, I've had agents who are like just flippers that'll like list one property a year, and they're a nightmare to work with because they don't do regular transactions and they're emotionally invested in this one flip, and it makes the transaction very difficult. It's like pulling teeth. There's no separation. Like you hire an agent, you hire a lawyer, you hire if you're a football player, you hire an agent to deal with the general managers as a layer of protection, right? To not get emotionally involved and to be a layer of protection. Same thing in real estate. If you're that person all in one, like you end up in a Lamar Jackson type situation where he's fighting with the GM for a year, and not getting paid, and that can go bad really quickly. So, yeah, but for the most part, I haven't ever seen a lot of problems with it. Yeah. Anything? Anyone? Good? Yeah. I think you came in last. Uh, what was your name? Okay. And you found us on Meetup? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a summer night. A lot of people didn't show. We had a bunch of people sign up. Yeah, they're having a good time. But I get it. It's the middle of summer. Everyone's at the airplane show in Atlantic City. So it's understandable. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's where all the boozing's happening. So yeah. So we're set. I'm gonna wrap up.